Alaska is the only place in the United States where disappearance is still considered an acceptable cause of death. Over 16,000 people have vanished in this state since 1988, many under circumstances that were never explained. Good evening, friends. If you enjoy this kind of content, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Tonight I put together some horror stories from Alaska. Stories that happen to ordinary people, just like you and me. The cold doesn't care who you are. The dark doesn't either. Welcome to the fear. Welcome to Alaska. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that belongs exclusively to Alaska. I have tried to explain it to people who have never been here, my sister in Brooklyn, my college roommate who lives in a glass and steel apartment in Century City with a view of the Pacific and a coffee machine that costs more than my monthly heating bill, and I always fail. They hear the word exhaustion and they think they understand it, because everyone is exhausted, because exhaustion is the universal American condition, the shared language of a country that decided somewhere along the way that being destroyed by your work is the same thing as being good at it. But the exhaustion I am talking about is not that. It is not the exhaustion of too many meetings or too many hours or too many notification sounds pulling you in 17 directions. It is something older and more specific. It is the exhaustion of existing in a place that was never designed for you. My name is Daniel Yu. I am 38 years old. I am a physician, emergency medicine, and I have been practicing at a rural critical access hospital 50 miles outside of Juneau for 4 years, which means I have spent 4 years being one of the only doctors within a distance that, in any other part of this country, would contain 3 major hospital systems, 12 urgent care centers, and a CVS on every corner. Out here it contains spruce trees and silence and mountains that do not care about you in a way that feels almost personal. I grew up in Koreatown in Los Angeles. I did my residency at Bellevue in Manhattan. I know what a city feels like, what it sounds like at 3 in the morning when the city is still running, still burning, still wanting things, sirens and restaurant exhaust and the specific underground rumble of the subway pressing up through concrete into the soles of your shoes. I know what it is to be surrounded by so many people that loneliness becomes almost impossible, or at least becomes a choice you have to actively make. Here, loneliness is not a choice. It is the weather. It is the infrastructure. It is baked into the 40 miles of 2-lane road between my house and the nearest grocery store, into the 3-hour floatplane ride that separates me from Anchorage when the weather allows, into the specific quality of silence that falls over everything out here after the first heavy snow of October and does not lift until April, maybe May, if you're lucky and the season is feeling generous. My sister calls me every Sunday and says, "Danny, just come home, there are hospitals in LA, you could be at Cedars-Sinai, you could be at UCLA Medical, you could have sushi delivered at midnight and drive on actual freeways and see the sun in December." And I always say the same thing, I'm needed here, which is true, and which is also the kind of thing people say when they're not ready to admit that they stayed somewhere long past the point of it making sense, when the staying has become its own pathology. But I think about it. I think about it more than I used to. On nights like the one I am describing. It was a Tuesday in November. I know it was Tuesday because I had specifically noted, at some point in the early afternoon, that Tuesday was the worst possible day to be the only physician on call in a facility with 9 beds, 3 nurses, 1 ultrasound machine that required a specific percussive calibration to function, and a backup generator that had been on my complaint list for 11 months. The day shift had been unremarkable in the way that day shifts out here are unremarkable. A laceration from a chainsaw that had misbehaved, a diabetic patient from the village of Cake who had been driven over 2 hours by his daughter because the nearest clinic had been closed for 3 weeks, a woman in her 60s with chest pain that turned out to be costochondritis and who cried when I told her, not from relief but because she had been genuinely hoping it was her heart, genuinely hoping that something was wrong enough to get her airlifted out of here, and I sat with that for a while because I understood it in a way that troubled me. The ambulance brought him in at 11:47 p.m. The report from the paramedics, 2 of them, both volunteers, both wearing expressions I recognized as the expression people wear when they have seen something that hasn't finished processing, was that he had been found on the old Glacier Highway by a driver who almost didn't stop, who almost convinced herself that the shape in her headlights was a deer. He was a white male, appeared to be in his mid to late 40s, found supine on the road surface, no ID, no vehicle in the vicinity, no visible wounds. Core temperature, taken in the field, 74.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Clinical death by hypothermia. They had worked him for 9 minutes en route with no response. I called it in the ambulance bay. Time of death 11:51 p.m. Both paramedics stood very still in the way people stand when they are waiting for the moment to be over, when they are waiting to be released back into the normal world where dead people stay dead and the night has a bottom to it. I started the paperwork. In emergency medicine, you learn early that paperwork is a coping mechanism, that the act of recording things in precise clinical language creates a useful distance between you and the fact that a man is lying in Bay 2 with no name and no story and a body temperature that indicates he had been outside and exposed for a minimum of 3 to 4 hours, which in November in southeast Alaska, in the dark, means something happened to him that the road was not going to tell us. The charge nurse that night was a woman named Patricia, who had been at this hospital for 16 years and had the specific unshockable quality of someone who has simply seen too much to allocate energy to being surprised. She prepped the body for storage while I finished the initial documentation, and I was at the nursing station with my coffee, cold, had been cold for 2 hours, staring at a form that asked for the patient's name and that I had filled in as John Doe with the same mild desolation I always felt filling in that particular blank, because John Doe is not a name, it is an admission of failure. It is the medical system saying we don't know who you are and we're sorry and we're moving on, when Patricia appeared in the doorway of Bay 2 and said, very quietly, Dr. Yu. The way she said it is something I have not been able to stop hearing. She said it the way you say someone's name when you need them to come but you don't want to say why out loud. The way you say it when saying more would make it real. He was sitting up. I need you to understand the physiology here, because I am a physician and the physiology matters, and I have spent a great deal of time, in the weeks since this happened, trying to construct a physiological explanation for what I witnessed, and I cannot do it. A core temperature of 74.2 degrees Fahrenheit represents profound, severe hypothermia. The heart at that temperature does not beat in any useful way. The brain at that temperature is not conscious. The peripheral circulation at that temperature has long since shut down, rerouting whatever resources remain to the core organs in a last, futile act of biological self-preservation. At 74.2 degrees, a human body is not a living body. It is an object in the process of completing a transition it began hours earlier. He was sitting upright on the gurney. His eyes were open. The fluorescent lights in Bay 2 were casting everything in that particular clinical white that makes sick people look sicker and dead people look like the specific kind of horror that stays with you, and his eyes were open and they were moving, not the glassy, fixed dilation of death, not the unseeing, fully dilated pupils I had noted during my initial assessment, but moving, tracking, looking around the bay with an expression I can only describe as orientation, the systematic visual cataloging of an unfamiliar environment that people do when they wake up somewhere they don't recognize. Patricia was standing against the far wall with her back pressed flat against it, and I have never seen that woman frightened, not in 4 years, not in the dozens of terrible nights we had worked together, and she was frightened. I walked into the bay. I am a doctor. Walking toward things is what I am trained to do, and the training goes deep enough that it will override a great deal, fear, revulsion, the very reasonable instinct to back out of a room slowly and let someone else handle whatever is happening in it. I walked toward him and I said his name, John, the placeholder name, the wrong name, and he turned his eyes to me and he looked at me with an attention that was so complete, so total, it felt like being the only thing in the room. He didn't speak for 40 minutes. I want to be absolutely precise about that number because I documented it, because documenting things is what I do when I don't know what else to do. 40 minutes of sitting on that gurney in that bay with a core temperature that I retook 3 times because I could not accept the reading, which had risen, inexplicably, to 93.1 degrees within 22 minutes of him sitting up, a rewarming rate that is physiologically impossible, that would require an internal heat generation that has no biological mechanism I am aware of. 40 minutes of watching me work, watching Patricia from across the room, following every movement in the bay. With those eyes, and not speaking. I thought about the hospital where I trained. Bellevue, on First Avenue in Manhattan, the oldest public hospital in the country, 17 floors, 1,200 beds, a trauma bay that never fully quiets, not at 2 in the morning, not on Christmas, because New York City will always generate enough suffering to fill it. I thought about what it would be like to have a colleague step into this bay right now. Another physician, a psychiatrist on call, a social worker, security, the apparatus of a large urban hospital that has seen everything and has a protocol for everything. I thought about Los Angeles, about Cedars-Sinai gleaming on Beverly Boulevard, and I thought, if you had just gone home, Daniel. If you had just gone back to California. The thought wasn't resentment. It was something closer to grief. When he finally spoke, his voice was not impaired the way you would expect. Hypothermia survivors, the genuine ones, the ones who survive profound hypothermia and recover neurologically, which is rare and remarkable and well documented in cold water drowning cases, emerge with confusion, disorientation, impaired speech, fragmented cognition. That is not what I heard. What I heard was a voice that was clear and deliberate and calibrated, like a voice that had decided what it was going to say before it said it. You shouldn't have brought me back. That was the first thing. I documented it verbatim at the nursing station immediately afterward, the way I document everything, because I believe in the record, I believe in the written account, I believe, or believed, past tense, believed before this night, that what can be written down can be understood and categorized and filed and made manageable. I asked him his name. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that was not confusion and was not hostility but was something I have seen in patients before, rarely, the expression of someone who is deciding how much to tell you, the expression of someone conducting a private calculation about what you can handle. He said, "What came back with me knows the way now." I asked him to clarify. I asked in the calm, direct, professionally neutral voice I use with patients in altered states, in psychosis, in the particular dissociation that sometimes follows severe physiological trauma. He watched me ask. He watched me with that complete, unbroken attention. He said, "It was there with me. The whole time I was out there. It was there before I was found. It was there when I was here." Patricia had moved to the doorway. I could see her in my peripheral vision, one hand on the door frame, and she was making a decision about whether to stay in the room or leave it, and I understood the decision, and I wanted to tell her to go, to leave, to go to the nursing station and call the state police and whoever else needed to be called, but I didn't take my eyes off him because he was my patient and I am a physician and this was my bay. He died again at 3:12 a.m. No deterioration. No prodromal signs. No arrhythmia on the monitor, no pressure changes, no respiratory distress. The monitor simply alarmed and the line went flat with the abruptness of something switched off, and he was lying back against the gurney with his eyes open and the room was exactly as it had been, and then every light in the building went out simultaneously. Not a flicker. Not a surge and fail sequence. Simultaneously. The fluorescents, the emergency hall lights, the nursing station monitors, the exit signs, the parking lot lights I could see through the bay window, all of it, at once, with a totality that felt deliberate in a way that power failures do not feel deliberate. Patricia said my name in the dark. I said generators coming, which was true, which should have been true, which should have taken no more than 8 seconds per the facility's operational protocol. I know because I had complained about the generator 11 months ago and they had told me 8 seconds, and I had measured it twice during test cycles and it was 8 seconds, 7.4 and 8.1, and I have written both numbers in my complaint documentation because I am someone who writes things down. The generator did not come on. We stood in the complete dark of that bay for what my phone told me afterward was 4 minutes and 19 seconds. I know it was 4 minutes and 19 seconds because I was looking at my phone, using the screen as light, and the screen illuminated approximately 3 feet of space around me and nothing beyond that, and I was not looking at the gurney. I was deliberately not looking at the gurney. I was looking at my phone and at the floor, and I was conducting the same internal negotiation that I imagined Patricia was conducting. Do not look, there is nothing to see, he is dead, dead people are not things, do not look. And I was thinking about Los Angeles with an intensity that surprised me, thinking about my mother's house in Koreatown, about the light there, the specific warm, relentless Southern California light that is the opposite of everything this place is, thinking I should never have come here, I should never have stayed. This exhaustion is not romantic, it is not noble, it is corrosive. It is the kind of tired that changes you permanently. The lights came back on. He was gone. Not, I want to be very precise, past, not deceased and awaiting transport, not body awaiting the coroner's collection. Gone. The gurney was empty. The sheet was flat. No impression in the sheet, no equipment disturbed, the floor line I had placed still taped to the bed rail with its needle end hanging free, the monitor leads coiled neatly in a way they had not been coiled before. The bay window, the one facing the parking lot, had a crack running through its lower left corner that had not been there at the start of my shift, a clean diagonal fracture in the safety glass. I have a police report number. I have a statement I gave to the Alaska State Troopers the following morning, after a night in which I sat in the nursing station with every light on and did not sleep and did not speak and did not check my phone even once, because I was afraid, irrationally. I told myself, irrationally, Daniel, you are a scientist, a physician, a person who operates in evidence. I was afraid of what I might find on it. The troopers took my statement and Patricia's statement, and they were professional and they were careful and they asked good questions, and the lead investigator, a woman named Whitmore who had the eyes of someone who had been doing this job in Southeast Alaska for a very long time, looked at me at the end of the interview and said, "This is not the first report from this area." She did not elaborate. I did not ask her to. They found no record of any missing persons matching his description. No vehicles abandoned on the old Glacier Highway. No footprints leading to or from the site where he was found, which the first responding paramedic mentioned almost incidentally in his own statement, the way you mention something that doesn't fit, that you have already decided must have a reasonable explanation. No footprints in the snow at the site of discovery. A man, found flat on a road, in the profound final cold of November, with no trace of how he got there. I have my resignation letter drafted. I have had it drafted for 3 weeks, in a folder on my desktop that I open sometimes and read and then close without submitting, because every time I am about to submit it I think about the woman from Cake who drove 2 hours with her father and what happens to her the next time if there is no one here, and that thought is enough to stop me, every time, and I am not sure if that makes me a good doctor or a broken one. But I check the generator now. Every night before I leave. I go to the utility room in the east wing and I put my hand on the housing and I run through the test cycle and I count the seconds. 7.4, 8.1, 7.8. I count them out loud. I have started counting out loud because the silence in that hallway, after midnight, has a quality I don't trust anymore, a density to it, a specific texture that I first noticed the night after the John Doe incident and have not been able to unfeel since, the way you cannot unfeel something once your body has registered it. Last Tuesday, running the test cycle at 12:40 a.m., the generator took 16 seconds. I stood in the utility room and I counted. 16. I counted twice. 16 both times. I made a note in the maintenance log with the time and the count, the way I make notes about everything, the way I have always believed that precision is protection, that documentation is a form of control, that if you write it down it becomes something you can look at from the outside. Then I walked back down the East Wing corridor toward the nursing station, and I stopped, because the door to Bay 2 was open, and Bay 2 is always locked after midnight since November, and I am the only one in the building, and I had not opened it. The room was dark. The hall light reached maybe 4 feet in. I stood at that doorway for a long time. A long, terrible time that I could not have accurately measured because I was not looking at my phone. I was looking at the dark rectangle of that bay, at the gurney I knew was in there, at the window with the diagonal crack that facilities had not yet replaced, at the absolute nothing that I could see in that dark. I told myself, you are a physician. You walk toward things. I told myself, whatever he said is not a diagnosis. Whatever he said is not a documented medical finding. Whatever he said is the utterance of a brain in the final stages of oxygen deprivation, and that is all it is. I told myself, there is nothing in that room. And then, from inside Bay 2, from the dark that my eyes could not penetrate, from a point approximately where the gurney was, I heard something. Not a voice. Not a sound I have a name for. A sound that my body understood before my brain did, the way you understand certain things when you are standing in a hallway in a 9-bed hospital 50 miles outside of Juneau at 12:47 in the morning, 40 miles from the nearest neighbor, 3 hours from the nearest city by float plane, further from Los Angeles than the moon feels, further from everything I have ever known and loved and chosen to leave behind. The way you understand, with your entire nervous system, that you are not alone. That you have not been alone. That whatever came back with him that night in November came back all the way, and found the place he had been, and decided to stay. I did not go into the room. I left the building. I got in my car and I drove to the one motel in town, and I sat in the parking lot until the sun came up at 10:12 in the morning, which is when the sun comes up in November in southeast Alaska, late and reluctant, like it too is considered not coming back at all. My resignation letter is still in the folder. I haven't opened it since that night. Not because I've decided to stay, but because every time I reach for the mouse, I think about the generator. About 16 seconds. About what can happen in 16 seconds in the kind of dark we have up here. About whether it matters, at this point, how far I run. About whether it already knows where I'm going. There is a sound the platform makes at 3 in the morning that it does not make at any other hour. I know this because I have been awake at 3 in the morning on this platform more times than I have slept through it, which is the kind of math that stops making sense after the second year and becomes simply the texture of your life, the background noise of a choice you made that you no longer fully remember making. The sound is structural, metal contracting in the cold, the compression of bolts and beams against the pressure of the Bering Sea moving underneath us the way the Bering Sea always moves, which is with the patient, complete indifference of something that was here long before you and has made no adjustments to its behavior to accommodate your presence. During the day the platform swallows that sound inside its own operational noise, the generators and the drills and the venting systems and the voices of the crew and the helicopters coming and going from Anchorage and Dutch Harbor with supplies and personnel. But at 3 in the morning, when the shift is down to skeleton crew and the wind is moving wrong and the sea is doing what the sea does out here in October, which is behave like something that has decided to end you specifically, at 3 in the morning the platform speaks in its own language, and I have learned enough of it to know, on the night I am telling you about, that what I was hearing was not the platform. My name is Kevin Marsh. I am 34 years old. I am a maintenance technician, which sounds neutral and transferable, the kind of job description you can take anywhere, and that's true. I could take it anywhere. That's the thing I think about out here more than anything else, more than the cold, more than the isolation, more than the particular psychological way of being on a structure in the middle of the Bering Sea where the nearest landmass of any significance is the Alaskan coastline and the nearest city with a hospital and a bar and More than one road is Anchorage, which is 300 miles away and might as well be on another planet when the weather closes in and the helicopters are grounded and the sea between you and everything you've ever known turns black and violent and reminds you, daily, that your presence here is provisional. I could work in Houston. I could work in the Gulf, on platforms where the water is warm enough that falling in doesn't mean dying in under 4 minutes. I could work in Aberdeen, Scotland, which I've heard is cold and grey but at least has pubs and history and the kind of small city density that means you are never more than 10 minutes from another human being who isn't also slowly being driven insane by the specific variety of madness this work produces. Instead, I am here. For years. For years on 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off rotations, which sounds reasonable until you understand what it does to your sense of continuity, what it does to every relationship you try to maintain on the shore, what it does to your understanding of where home is when home is a bunk in a steel structure over cold water for half of every month. My ex-wife, we separated 18 months ago, which I attribute in roughly equal parts to the Bering Sea and to the version of me that came back from it every 2 weeks, quieter and further away each time. She used to say I looked like I was still on the platform even while I was sitting in our kitchen in Anchorage. She wasn't wrong. You don't leave this place when the helicopter lifts. Some part of you stays behind in the noise and the dark and the cold, and after enough rotations the part that stays starts to feel more like the real you than the part that comes home. I had been thinking about Texas. Not seriously, or not yet seriously, but the way you think about things when the serious version is getting closer, the way you search job boards at 2 in the morning in your bunk with your phone angled away from your bunkmate's face, looking at maintenance positions in Corpus Christi, in Port Arthur, in the Gulf Coast yards where the starting pay is comparable and the water is warm and nobody loses a finger to frostbite and nobody goes quiet in the way people go quiet up here, in the way the Bering Sea and the dark and the endless isolation accumulates in a person like water in a basement. I had a number in my head. 18 months. If I stay 18 more months, the pension vesting threshold clears and I can leave with something. I can leave without having given all of this to a company that flies its executives in from Houston for 2 days safety walkthroughs and shakes your hand with the specific practice warmth of people who have been trained to do so and then flies back out to their regular lives and their regular light. 18 months felt achievable. 18 months felt like something I could hold in both hands. That was before October 14th. Before 3 in the morning. Before the scratching inside the walls. I want to be precise about when it started because precision is what I have. Precision is the discipline this work demands, the careful attention to the difference between a sound that means something is fine and a sound that means something is about to not be fine, the categorical knowledge of what every noise in every section of this platform is supposed to sound like versus what it is actually producing, which is the core skill of my job, the thing I do, the thing I am specifically good at. And specifically paid to do. I was doing the 2 a.m. walkthrough on D-deck, the lower maintenance level, closest to the waterline, the section that smells permanently of brine and hydraulic fluid and that particular metallic cold that has no equivalent on land. The walkthrough is routine, is always routine, is one of those tasks that the body performs while the mind does something else entirely, and my mind was doing what it usually does at 2 a.m., which is construct and deconstruct the argument for leaving, the balance sheet of staying versus going, the calculation of what 4 years of this has cost me against what it has returned. The scratching began in the starboard interior wall of section D7. I stopped walking. This is the first thing you do when you hear something you don't recognize. You stop moving, you eliminate your own noise from the equation, and you listen with the full and undivided attention that most of us reserve for things that already frighten us. The wall in question is a double-skinned steel panel, insulated, housing a section of the secondary hydraulic routing. I know it the way I know every wall on D-deck, which is intimately, the way you know the inside of a space you have been responsible for over a period of years. There is nothing living inside that wall. There is no pathway into that wall from the exterior that would allow anything to enter without my knowledge, without breach indicators, without the kind of structural damage that would have flagged in the monitoring systems I had checked 2 hours earlier and that had shown nothing. The scratching was rhythmic. Not irregular, not the random arrhythmic scrabble of an animal, and there are no animals on a Bering Sea platform. I need to say that clearly. I need to say it because I know that is where your brain goes, and I need you to understand that mine went there too, went there first, went there and found nothing to hold on to because the reasoning doesn't work, because nothing lives out here, nothing survives out here. The sea doesn't support stowaways and neither does the air, and even if something had somehow crossed from the coast or from a passing vessel, the spaces inside a D-deck wall panel are not accessible. The scratching was rhythmic in the way that intentional things are rhythmic. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. Like something dragging something across the inside of a metal surface to produce a sound for an audience. I have a colleague named Briggs who has been on this platform for 11 years and who has the particular stoicism of a man who has decided, at some cellular level, that being disturbed by things is a luxury he cannot afford. He grew up in Wasilla and worked fishing boats before oil and has the physical quality of someone built by an environment specifically hostile to softness. I have seen Briggs handle things on this platform that would send a reasonable person to a therapist, handle them with the flat, functional efficiency of someone for whom the work is the whole world and the whole world is manageable if you approach it correctly. I thought about calling Briggs on the radio. I did not call Briggs on the radio. I stood in section D7 at 2:08 in the morning and I listened to the scratching inside the wall, and I did not call anyone because the act of calling someone would have required me to say out loud what I was hearing, and saying it out loud would have made it undeniably real, and for a few more minutes I was not ready for it to be undeniably real. It stopped. The stopping was as abrupt as the starting, no fade, no trailing off, just present and then not present, the way sounds stop when the thing making them has decided to stop. I stood in D7 for another 3 minutes. Nothing. The platform's normal nocturnal vocabulary resumed around me, the structural groaning, the generator hum from above, the irregular percussion of water against the hull. I finished the walkthrough. I wrote nothing in the log because I had nothing definitive to write, because I am a precise person and precision requires that you not document what you cannot verify, and I could not verify anything except that I had heard a sound that I could not explain, which is not a maintenance log entry, which is a description of a bad night. The second night, it was louder. And it had moved. D4 this time, amidships, a section I had walked past 40 minutes earlier without incident. I was coming back down the corridor when I heard it through the wall to my right, the same rhythm, the same slow deliberate quality, but closer to the surface of the panel, as though whatever was producing it had moved toward me, as though the wall between us had become of interest to it. I put my hand flat against the steel. The panel was cold the way every surface on D-deck is cold, and then, I am going to tell you this exactly as it happened, I felt, through my palm, through the steel, a vibration that was not consistent with the scratching sound I was hearing. The scratching was on the surface. The vibration was deeper. It was inside. It was the vibration of something with mass moving through the interior space, and the interior space of a D-deck wall panel is approximately 4 inches wide and houses nothing that has mass in that way, nothing that moves. I pulled my hand back. The scratching stopped. The vibration continued for exactly 4 more seconds, and then it stopped too, and I was standing alone in the D4 corridor at 2:51 in the morning in the fluorescent light that makes everyone on this platform look slightly dead, and my hand was shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. I thought about Houston. I thought about it with a specificity I hadn't allowed myself before, an apartment in the Heights neighborhood, trees that aren't spruce trees, a regular schedule, daylight that arrives at a reasonable hour and doesn't vanish at 3 in the afternoon for 5 months of the year. I thought about what it would mean to be a maintenance technician at a facility where you can drive away at the end of your shift, where the land under your feet is actual land, where there is no version of the night that can trap you. I thought, you are 34. You have given 4 years to this. At 34 in Houston or in Port Arthur or in literally any other place that is not the Bering Sea, you are a skilled and experienced technician with options. Here you are, a man in a corridor with a shaking hand who cannot account for what he just felt through a steel wall, and the difference between those two men matters, and nobody here sees the difference, and nobody here is going to. The third night was the night I stopped sleeping. It was in the walls of my bunk room. I want you to understand the geography of a bunk room on an offshore platform, because the geography is relevant to the horror of this. It is approximately 12 feet by 14 feet. It contains 4 bunks, 2 sets of 2, bolted to opposite walls. My bunkmate on that rotation was a man named Torres, who sleeps with the mechanical consistency of someone who has made peace with every circumstance of his life, and who was breathing in his slow, even pattern across the room from me when I heard the scratching begin in the wall behind my head, behind the 6 inches of steel and insulation that separate my bunk from the exterior platform structure, and, beyond that, from the Bering Sea. Behind my head. 4 inches from my skull. The same rhythm. Slow. Even. The sound of something that knew where I was. I lay completely still. I am aware of how this sounds. I am a grown man, a trained technician, a person who has worked in dangerous environments for the better part of a decade and who has been in situations that required genuine physical courage, equipment failures, a fire in the E-deck pump room 3 years ago that I helped contain before it reached the secondary hydraulic lines, a man overboard drill in October seas that reminded me with complete physical clarity what the water out here actually means. I have not described myself to you as a frightened person. I am describing myself to you now, in the most precise and honest terms I have available, as a frightened person, lying in my bunk at 3 a.m. in the Bering Sea with the scratching 4 inches from the back of my head and Torres breathing across the room and the platform speaking its nighttime language all around me, and I did not move. Because there was something else. Under the scratching, behind it, the way the vibration had been behind the scratching on D4, there was a sound I had to hold my breath to hear. I held my breath and I heard it, and I have wished since then, with genuine and sustained intensity, that I had not. It was not a mechanical sound. It was not structural. It was not any category of sound that belongs on a steel platform over deep cold water in the Bering Sea. It was something that moved in the space between the scratching sounds, in the brief silences between each rhythmic drag, and it was low and wet and variable, and the variation, the almost pattern of it, was the most frightening thing I have ever heard, because my brain, doing what brains do with sound, doing what my brain specifically does with sound after 4 years of learning this platform's language, was assembling the variation into something that was almost words, and I was not going to let it complete that assembly. I was going to lie in my bunk with my eyes open and my hands flat at my sides, and I was not going to let it finish, because I understood with the irrational certainty of deep night and genuine dread that letting it finish was a threshold I did not want to cross. Torres slept through all of it. I have thought about this a great deal. I reported it in the morning to the shift supervisor, a man named Garrett, who has the bristling, exhausted authority of someone managing too many people in too small a space for too long. I described the sounds. I described the progression, D7, D4, bunk room. I described the vibration I had felt on D4. I described the wall behind my head. Garrett listened with the expression he uses when he is deciding how much of what you're saying to take seriously, and then he sent 2 other techs to check the D-deck wall panels for rodent intrusion or water infiltration or anything that could account for an unexplained sound. They found nothing. No breaches, no evidence of intrusion, no moisture, no structural anomaly. They checked the wall behind my bunk and reported that the insulation was intact and the panel was sealed. Garrett said, probably the pressure differential from the weather system that came through. These walls move. And then he moved on, the way people move on when they have allocated the maximum available concern to a problem and need the next problem. I said nothing else. There was nothing else to say that would not have relocated me into a category of person that I could not afford to be on platform 2 weeks from shore. But I had checked those D-deck panels myself, the same panels the other techs checked that morning, checked them the same way I check everything, which is with full attention and trained hands. And what I had not told Garrett, what I had not put into any log, what I had not said to anyone, and am saying now for the first time, is what I found when I ran my flashlight along the interior seam of the D7 panel where I had first heard the scratching 5 nights earlier. The inner surface of the steel, facing the wall cavity, was marked. Not damaged. Marked. Parallel lines, faint but deliberate, running horizontally at approximately chest height, approximately 18 inches across. Even spacing. Even depth. The kind of marks that are left by something drawn repeatedly across a surface with the specific intent of leaving a record. The marks were not there 6 weeks ago. I know this because I had documented the condition of every D-deck panel interior in the September maintenance report, and the September maintenance report is in the system, and the September maintenance report shows no anomalies in D7. Something had made those marks from the inside. I have been on 2-week rotations for 4 years. I have been on this platform long enough to know every sound it makes, every way it moves, everything it contains. I know with complete professional confidence what can and cannot physically exist inside a sealed wall panel on D-deck of a Bering Sea platform in October. I know it the way I know my own hands, the way I know the block heater schedule and the hydraulic pressure tolerances and the 7-second test cycle on the emergency lighting, with the absolute categorical certainty of trained experience. What I am telling you is that my trained experience has no category for what I heard in those walls for 5 nights. My trained experience has no category for the marks inside that panel. My trained experience has no category for the sound that was almost words behind my head at 3 in the morning, that was patient and rhythmic and aware, that stopped every time I stopped moving and started again when I settled, as though it was responding to me, as though it was learning me the way I had learned the platform, intimately, incrementally, with the focused attention of something that intended to remain. I finished that rotation 4 days later. I got on the helicopter to Dutch Harbor and then the connecting flight to Anchorage, and I sat in the Anchorage airport for 2 hours with my bag on the floor between my feet, and I looked at the board and I thought about Houston, thought about it with a clarity I had not allowed myself before, without the pension calculus, without the 18-month arithmetic, without the careful professional reasoning that had kept me on that platform for 4 years past the point where the platform had started costing me things I was not consenting to give. I went home. I sat in my apartment, not the one I had shared, the small one in South Anchorage that I had moved into after the separation, with its view of the Chugach and its persistent smell of the previous tenant's dogs, and I sat on my couch for a long time without turning on the television, without making food, without doing anything except sitting in the silence and noticing the specific character of it. The silence of a room in Anchorage. The silence of a place on land, a place with soil under it, a place you can walk away from. I have not gone back. My resignation is in. 2 weeks' notice, which I submitted by email because I could not make the phone call without the call becoming a conversation, and I did not want a conversation. I did not want to be managed or reasoned with or reminded of the pension threshold or told by Garrett or anyone else that what I heard in those walls was pressure differential and weather systems and the ordinary sounds of a structure under stress. I know what structures under stress sound like. I have known for 4 years. What I heard in those walls was not that. I have a call scheduled with a recruiting firm in Houston. Marine maintenance, Gulf Coast facilities, warm water, a regular schedule, a life that does not require me to become someone capable of sustaining a 2-week rotation on the Bering Sea in October with whatever is inside those walls. I am going to take the first reasonable offer. I am going to take it without negotiating, without the careful calculation I have applied to every decision of my professional life, because some calculations have a threshold past which the math stops being the point. People say Alaska is for the strong. They say it at the bars in Anchorage, they say it in the safety briefings, they say it in the onboarding materials for new platform hires, they say it with the specific pride of people who need the difficulty of their choice to mean something. They say it and I believed it and I stayed and I was strong. For 4 years I was exactly as strong as this place required me to be. I was strong through the isolation and the cold and the rotating absence from every relationship I tried to maintain and the slow quiet erosion of the version of me that existed before the platform. I was strong for a long time. I am done. What lives inside those walls can have them. It can have the dark and the cold and the 3 in the morning and the weight of the Bering Sea moving underneath. It can have the rhythm it practiced behind my head, the almost words it was assembling in the space between sounds, the marks it made on the inside of sealed steel to leave a record of its patience. It earned all of it. It stayed when I chose to leave, and whatever it is, whatever category of thing requires no breach, leaves no footprints, knows which wall you sleep against and scratches at it from the inside at the exact hour when the platform's ordinary noise recedes enough to be heard. It belongs to this place in a way that I understand now. In my bones, I was never going to. Alaska is for the strong. I was strong for long enough. I am not going back. I have a photograph on my phone that I have not deleted and cannot explain, and some nights I take it out and look at it the way you look at something you know is going to hurt you, with the specific voluntary masochism of a person who has decided that understanding matters more than comfort. In the photograph, taken on a Tuesday in March on the Seward Highway approximately 31 miles south of Anchorage, my truck's hood is crumpled against what appears, at first glance, to be the aftermath of a large animal strike. The hood is buckled at the center. The windshield has a radial fracture on the passenger side. The front grille is destroyed in the particular compressed way that grilles are destroyed when something large and solid meets them at highway speed. These are the facts of the photograph, the things that can be verified, the things that the insurance adjuster verified when I filed the claim and told him I had hit a moose, which is what I told him because it was the only category available to me, the only thing I was able to say out loud to another human being without the conversation becoming something I wasn't ready for. What the photograph also shows, if you look at it long enough, if you zoom into the lower right quadrant where the roadside snow catches the ambient light of the headlights in a way I didn't notice when I was standing there in the dark and the cold and the aftermath of impact, what the photograph shows is that the snow beside my truck, in the area where the thing I hit should have fallen, is undisturbed. Flat. Unmarked. The snow that should contain the evidence of a large animal, the blood and the body and the specific catastrophic disorder of an 800-pound creature struck at 55 miles per hour, that snow is smooth and perfect and white, and there is nothing in it, and there is no trail leading away from it into the treeline, and there are no tracks. There is no moose. I moved my family to Alaska 3 years ago. I want to be clear about the sequence of that decision, about the specific domestic machinery that produced it, because I think about it constantly now in a way that feels less like reflection and more like prosecution, less like a man examining his choices and more like a man building the case against himself. My wife, Claire, is originally from Anchorage. Her parents still live there, in a house in the hillside neighborhood with a view of the inlet and a driveway that requires a dedicated snow removal strategy from October through April. When her father had his first cardiac event in the fall of our daughter's 3rd year, Claire started talking about going home in a way that was at first conversational and then gradually became something with more structural weight to it, the way water gradually becomes ice, the transition invisible until it has already happened. I was working in logistics management in Cincinnati. Decent salary, unremarkable work, the kind of mid-level corporate existence that provides adequately for a family of 4 while producing in the person living at a low-grade, persistent sense of having arrived nowhere in particular. When the company offered a remote work arrangement, the last geographical argument evaporated. So we went. We found a house outside of Girdwood, not in Girdwood, which has the mitigating advantage of being a small town with a ski resort and the attendant human density that comes with tourism infrastructure, but outside of it, up a road that the listing described as private and secluded and that I now understand was a real estate agent's way of saying the nearest neighbor cannot hear you, which is a different thing than distance, which is a different kind of alone. The house was beautiful in the way that Alaska is relentlessly, almost aggressively beautiful. Mountains, tree-lined, the inlet visible from the back deck on clear days, the specific quality of winter light that hits the snow and produces a brightness that seems to come from inside the ground. My daughter Lily, who was 4 when we arrived, adapted with the elastic fearlessness of small children who experience the world as primarily spatial rather than social, and for whom a large yard full of snow is a more compelling reality than the absence of a neighborhood. My son Marcus, who was 7, struggled more. He said, once, with the unfiltered precision of a second grader, "Dad, why did we move to the place where nobody lives?" I laughed. I did not have a good answer. The isolation gets into you in ways you don't notice until it has already gotten in. It's not dramatic, not at first. It's small. It's the Tuesday in February when you realize you have not had a conversation with another adult, outside of a screen, for 6 days. It's the specific quality of the drive into Anchorage for groceries, 45 minutes in good weather, an hour and a half when the highway ices and the Tennessee Arm is doing what the Tennessee Arm does in winter, which is behave like a landscape that is actively hostile to the presence of human infrastructure. It's the way you start to feel, after enough months, that the country you grew up in is not exactly the same country that exists up here, that Alaska is a geological fact rather than a civic one, that the institutions and networks and assumptions of American life that you absorbed as a child and never questioned, the proximity of help, the reliability of response times, the background assumption that if something goes wrong, something will come, apply here with significant asterisks and considerable lag. We had been in the house for 2 years and 4 months when it happened. The night started unremarkably in the specific way that terrible nights often do, with the mundane domestic scaffolding of dinner and homework and a 7-year-old's ongoing negotiation around bedtime that I was too tired to win decisively, and Claire had a headache and went to bed early, and the house settled into the post-children silence that is the closest thing to peace that parents of young children reliably get. I watched television until 10:30 with the specific unfocused attention of someone who is present in body only, and then I got the call from my father-in-law that his medication needed to be picked up from the pharmacy in Anchorage, a pharmacy in Anchorage that closed at 11. It was 10:38, and the medication was a blood thinner he had missed 2 doses of, and his cardiologist had been unambiguous about the protocol. I kissed Claire, who was half asleep, and murmured something about being careful on the highway, which is what she always said and which I always acknowledged, and which I had been careful on the highway enough times to have become casual about the warning. I took the truck. The night was clear, which in March in south-central Alaska means cold and brilliant, the sky doing that thing it does up here with the stars that reminds you that you are in a place with very little light pollution, which is either beautiful or terrifying depending on what the night has decided to show you. The highway was good. The radio was a country station out of Anchorage playing something I half knew. I was thinking about Marcus, about whether I should look into the online school programs more seriously, about whether the decision we had made, my decision, my management of Claire's desire to come home into a permanent geographical change that now belonged to all 4 of us, was producing the life I had told myself it would produce, or whether it was producing something quieter and more corrosive that I was not yet willing to name. I was thinking about this when the headlights caught it. At approximately 55 miles per hour, you have, and I have calculated this since, with the specific obsessive precision of someone trying to understand something they cannot understand, approximately 1.8 seconds between seeing a large obstacle in your headlights and the moment of impact, assuming you apply brakes immediately. I did not apply brakes immediately. The first fraction of that 1.8 seconds was consumed by the brain's identification process, the categorical sorting that I described earlier, the split second in which the visual information is matched against known categories, deer, moose, debris, person, and during which the motor response is on hold, waiting for the identification to complete before initiating. The identification did not complete. What I saw, in the headlights, was large. That much is certain, that much is physiologically verified by the damage to my truck, the damage and insurance adjuster looked at and said, with the flat professional certainty of someone who has processed many large animal strikes in this state, "Yeah, that's a moose, 800, maybe 900 pounds. What I saw was large, and it was in the road, and it was on 4 legs, and those facts should have been sufficient to complete the identification, should have matched against the moose category and produced the moose response and given me a clean, terrible, comprehensible accident. Instead, for the fraction of a second before impact, something in my visual processing flagged an error. Something sent up a signal that said, the legs are wrong. Not wrong in a countable way. Not wrong in a way I can diagram or describe with precision even now, 3 months later, with the photograph on my phone to reference. Wrong in the way that a thing is wrong when your nervous system understands it before your conscious mind does, when the animal part of your brain, the part that is older than language, older than reason, older than the entire project of being a person in a country with insurance adjusters and pharmacies and highways, when that part sends a signal that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to the body. My hands came off the wheel before I applied the brakes. I am not sure I decided to do that. I am not sure the decision was mine. The impact was violent in the way that all impacts at speed are violent, with the full body compression and the sound. The sound is the thing that stays, a sound that is not a crash sound the way movies represent crash sounds, but is instead a dense, wet, structural concussion that you feel in your teeth and your sternum simultaneously. And then the truck was stopped and the engine had died and the airbag had not deployed because the impact was distributed in a way that the deployment sensors did not interpret as requiring it, and I was sitting in the stopped truck on a dark highway with the headlights still on, illuminating the road ahead and the tree line on either side and the crumpled hood and the cracked windshield and the empty road. I sat there for a time I cannot accurately estimate. Long enough for my hands to stop trembling. Long enough for the breath to come back in something approximating a normal pattern. Long enough for the mind to begin its damage assessment, the sequential checking of functions. I can move my hands, I can move my feet, my neck is intact, my vision is intact, the inventory you run when the body has been through something sudden. Then I got out of the truck. The cold came in immediately, total and authoritative, the March cold of midnight on the Seward Highway, the cold that reminds you that the agreement between your body and this environment is entirely provisional and has always been provisional. I walked to the front of the truck with my phone's flashlight on. The damage was extensive, the hood buckled upward, the grille compressed, something in the front axle geometry that I could feel even before I looked, a subtle wrongness in the vehicle's relationship to the ground. I swept the flashlight across the impact point and then, naturally, in the direction the thing would have gone, forward, to the right, in the trajectory that physics assigns to an object struck from behind at highway speed. The snow to the right of the highway was unmarked. I stood there with my phone flashlight and I looked at that snow for a long time. The snow was undisturbed in the specific, total way that snow is undisturbed when nothing has touched it since it fell, the surface unmarred, the crust unbroken, no depression, no spray, no the catastrophic physical record that an 800-pound animal leaves when it is struck by a moving vehicle and thrown clear of the road. The shoulder had maybe 3 feet of packed snow before the tree line, and the tree line was dense spruce, and the spruce were undisturbed, no broken branches at impact height, no disruption of the snow load on the lower boughs that would indicate that something large had gone through or past them. I swept the flashlight back across the road itself. No blood. No hair. No biological material of any kind on the asphalt or on the snow beside it, not on the crumpled hood of my truck, not on the grille, not on the bumper. I am not a forensic investigator, but I have seen the aftermath of moose strikes out here, and there is a quality to them that is visceral and definitive, a biological excess that the cold preserves rather than diminishes, and there was none of it. There was the damaged truck, and there was the empty road, and there was the undisturbed snow, and there was me, standing between them with a phone flashlight at midnight, 31 miles from a city. I thought about Claire. About the specific quality of the sound she makes when she's genuinely frightened, a sound I have heard only twice in our marriage, both times when the children were involved, a sound that is quiet and low and completely unlike her. I thought about what I would say when I called her. I thought about what I would say to anyone. I thought about my son asking why we moved to the place where nobody lives, and about the answer I still didn't have, and about whether the answer was something like, because your mother needed to come home, or something more honest, like, because I needed to believe that a life with fewer people in it would be a quieter life, and I confused quiet with safe, which is a confusion I have now been educated of in a way I would not have chosen. I called the state troopers. Response time to my location, I was told, would be approximately 45 minutes. This is not a criticism. 45 minutes is what the math of trooper coverage in this geography produces, the direct arithmetic of how many people there are to cover how much space, and the space wins every time. I sat in the damaged truck with the heat running, the engine had restarted, which was one functional mercy the night provided, and I waited, and I looked at the road ahead in the headlights, and I tried to construct a rational account of what had happened. The trooper who arrived was professional and efficient and had the particular quality that people who work emergency response in remote Alaska develop, a quality of absolute unshockability, of having long since recalibrated what the range of normal looks like. He walked the scene. He looked at the truck. He looked at the snow. He walked back and forth between them twice, and I watched him do it, and I watched his face while he did it, and I want to tell you that I saw something in his face during those two passes, not alarm, not confusion, something more controlled than either of those, something that looked like recognition being actively managed, being filed away behind the professional surface. He did not say anything about the absence of the animal. He filed the report as a large animal strike and helped me arrange a tow to a lot in Anchorage and gave me a ride to a motel on Spenard Road and said, at the door of his vehicle, before I got out, not quite looking at me, "You did the right thing, stopping." Some people don't stop. Some people just drive. I said I knew. He said, out here, past the arm, after midnight, it's better not to pull over when you don't know what you hit. It's better to just drive to where the lights are. I said I would remember that. He drove away without elaborating, and I stood in the motel parking lot in the Anchorage cold and understood that he had just told me something without telling me anything, and that the something was not nothing. I found the photograph 3 days later, going through my phone. I had not known I'd taken it. The timestamp said 12:04 a.m., consistent with when I had been standing at the front of the truck. I held my phone in my hand in my kitchen in the house outside Girdwood, and I looked at the lower right quadrant for a long time, at the smooth, perfect snow, and then I zoomed in on something I hadn't noticed, something at the edge of the headlight range, at the point where the snow meets the tree line in the right side of the frame. There is a shape there. I want to be very careful about how I describe this because I have looked at it many times and I have tried the explanations, shadow, branch, trick of the headlight angle, and I cannot make them hold. The shape is at the tree line, approximately where the thing I hit should have gone if it had gone into the trees. It is large. It is vertical in a way that branches are not vertical, in a way that suggests something standing rather than something growing. It is facing the road. It is facing, as far as I can determine from the photograph, in the direction of my truck. And its legs, the lower portion of the shape, the portion that contacts the ground, are wrong. I cannot tell you how they are wrong in a way that will satisfy you, in a way that will translate from what my visual cortex registers into language that maps it precisely. I can only tell you that they are wrong in the same way they were wrong for the fraction of a second before impact, in the same way that my hands came off the wheel before I decided to remove them, wrong in the way that activates the oldest and most inarticulate part of the brain, the part that does not use words. I have not driven this Seward highway after dark since March. I have found a pharmacy in Girdwood that handles my father-in-law's medications with a same-day transfer arrangement. I have had conversations with Claire, careful, incomplete conversations, the kind you have when you need to begin a subject without arriving at its conclusion, about what it would mean to go back. To sell the house. To find something outside of Anchorage, maybe, or something in a neighborhood with streetlights and houses close enough that you can see your neighbor's windows from your kitchen and your neighbor can see yours. She is not ready. Her father's health remains fragile and her roots here run deep in the way that people's roots run deep when they grew up somewhere, and the somewhere is the only landscape they have ever fully trusted. I understand this. I do not push. But I think about what the trooper said, it's better not to pull over when you don't know what you hit, and I think about my son's question, why did we move to the place where nobody lives, and I think about the shape of the tree line in the photograph, standing at the edge of the headlight range with its wrong legs and its attention fixed on the road, and I think about how many times I have driven that highway after dark over the past 2 years. All the nighttime returns from Anchorage, all. The late runs for medications and groceries and the million errand-shaped reasons that send a person out alone onto a dark highway in a place this remote, and I think about how many times the headlights might have caught something that I processed too quickly, categorized too fast, filed under moose or deer or darkness before the second look could complicate the answer. How many times the 1.8 seconds ran out before the identification completed. How many times I drove past something that was standing at the tree line, watching. We moved here because Claire needed to come home. We stayed because inertia is a powerful force and because the life we built here is real and the children are rooted in their way and the house is beautiful and the mountains do not care about you but they are magnificent in their not caring, and there is a version of this life that I can defend, that I have defended to my parents and to colleagues and to anyone who has ever looked at me with the faint puzzlement that people who live in cities look at people who live outside them. I can make the argument. I have made it many times. I cannot make it as easily with the photograph open on my phone. I cannot make it at midnight when the house is quiet and the tree line is 30 yards from the back deck and the dark out here is the dark of a place where the lights do not reach, where the nearest person who could hear you is far enough away that the distance has a different meaning than distance usually does, where the Seward Highway runs south into 30 miles of mountain and coastline and the specific American solitude of a state that contains more wilderness than the next 7 states. Combined and is forgotten by the rest of the country the way things are forgotten when they are too large and too far and too different to fit comfortably into the national story. We are out here and we are real and we are a family and the place is beautiful and I cannot sleep when the wind moves the spruce boughs against the back of the house the way it moved them last night, the slow deliberate sound of something large moving against a surface, rhythmic and patient, at the hour when I have learned not to look outside. I know I hit on the Seward Highway. I know it the way I knew it in the 1.8 seconds before impact, before the brain had time to reach its revision. I know it the way the trooper knew it when he looked at the unmarked snow and chose his words carefully and told me, without telling me, to drive toward the lights next time. There was something on that road. It was not a moose. And the shape in the photograph, the shape that is still there, that is still standing at the tree line and the headlight's edge, that is still facing the road on whatever night that photograph belongs to in its permanent present tense, that shape went back into the trees. It knows this highway. It knows this highway and I still drive it and I have a daughter who is 6 years old now and a son who is 8 and a house 30 yards from a tree line in the dark of a state that the country forgets, and the forgetting is the thing that lives underneath all of it, the thing I cannot stop thinking about since March, that if something happens out here, if something steps out of those trees on a night when I am not in the truck, when the children are in the yard, when the distance between us and any form of response is measured in the kind of minutes that are also measured in the kinds of things that can happen in minutes, the country will not notice. The country does not look at this part of itself. The country drives the highways it knows toward the lights it can see and does not pull over in the dark for things it cannot identify, and I understand the wisdom of that now. I understand it completely, and I understand that the wisdom arrived too late, and that we are already here, already in the house, already 30 yards from the tree line, and the shape I saw in the photograph is out there in the permanent Alaskan dark, and it already knows exactly where we are. I have driven the Parks Highway more times than I can count. More times than I've called my mother back in Ohio. More times than I've eaten a hot meal that wasn't microwaved at 2 in the morning after a 12-hour shift. I know that road the way you only know something when it has quietly taken pieces of you, the long, suffocating stretches of nothing between Wasilla and Fairbanks, the way the tree line presses against the asphalt like it's deciding whether or not to swallow it whole, the way the darkness up here isn't like darkness anywhere else on Earth. Down in the lower 48, darkness is just the absence of light. Up here, in interior Alaska, in the dead of January, darkness is a presence. It has weight. It has texture. It presses against your windshield like it wants to get inside. I moved to Fairbanks 6 years ago for the job. That's what everyone says, and it's what I said too, because saying I moved here because I didn't want to be found sounds unstable at a job interview. Providence, Alaska Medical Center had an opening for a registered nurse in the emergency department, and I had a fresh degree, a bad divorce finalized in August, and absolutely nothing tying me to Columbus anymore. My apartment there still smelled like his cologne even after I threw out every single thing he had ever touched. The job posting said relocation assistance provided, and I remember thinking, yes. Far. Make it far. Make it so far that even the version of me that existed before stops being able to find her way back. Fairbanks is 360 miles from Anchorage. In winter, that distance becomes something philosophical. You don't just travel it. You survive it, or you don't. The temperature on the night this happened was 41 below zero, not counting wind chill, which nobody up here bothers to count because counting it only makes you feel worse about the choices that led you to this specific latitude. My truck is a 2019 Ford F-250 with a block heater I plug in every single night because if I forget even once, the engine becomes a useless sculpture of frozen metal and broken promises. I had my heat cranked so high that the air coming out of the vents felt like breathing through a hairdryer. My scrubs were still damp from the sweat of a double shift. 14 hours. 3 overdoses, 1 cardiac event, and a 52-year-old man who had driven down from North Pole for reasons he was too embarrassed to explain to the paramedics, and a 17-year-old girl brought in by her boyfriend with a story that didn't match her injuries, which is the kind of thing that follows you home and sits in the passenger seat and stares at you the whole drive. It was 3:14 in the morning. I remember the time because I had just looked at my phone to see if my friend Dana had texted back. She was supposed to come up from Anchorage for the weekend, and I had this specific, domestic anxiety about whether I had clean sheets, about whether my apartment looked lonely in the way that apartments look when someone who lives alone has stopped trying to hide it. She hadn't texted. The road ahead was empty and black and lined on both sides by spruce trees so loaded with snow they looked like hunched figures, like a procession of something that had been waiting beside that road for longer than the road had existed. I saw him at maybe 200 feet. My headlights caught in the way they catch road signs, suddenly, completely, with that particular quality of illumination that makes things look more real than real for just a second. He was standing directly in the center of the highway. Not on the shoulder. Not walking. Standing. Both feet planted, arms at his sides, facing me. He was wearing a dark flannel shirt, jeans, and boots, and absolutely nothing else. No coat. No hat. No gloves. At 41 below zero. I don't know if you've ever been outside in that kind of cold for even 30 seconds. It is not an uncomfortable cold, it is a violent one. It is the kind of cold that makes the inside of your nose freeze on the first inhale. The kind that makes exposed skin go white and waxy in minutes. The kind that kills you in a way that looks almost peaceful from the outside, which is the most deceptive thing about it. I hit the brakes hard. The truck shuddered and fishtailed slightly on a patch of compacted snow before stopping about 30 feet from him. My heart was slamming against the inside of my chest so hard I could feel it in my back teeth. The headlights lit him up completely. He was a white man, probably mid-40s, with dark hair plastered flat against his forehead in the way hair gets when it's been wet and then the moisture has frozen. His face was, and I have tried many times to find a less clinical way to say this, wrong. Not wrong in a way I can itemize. Just wrong. The specific quality of wrongness you register with your nervous system before your brain catches up, the same way you know a sound is a scream before you've consciously processed the sound. He was staring directly at me. Through the windshield. His eyes were open and they were catching the headlights in a way that eyes catch headlights, that flat reflective quality you see in animals at the side of the road, except this was not an animal, or it was not supposed to be, and the reflection was wrong too uniform, too even, like two pieces of old mirror pressed into a face. I sat there for what felt like a full minute but was probably 8 seconds. My brain was doing that thing where it runs through scenarios rapidly, like a card shuffle. He's drunk, he's in shock, he's a crash victim, his car went off the road somewhere, because the brain will work very hard to make something fit into a category it already is rather than accept that what it's looking at does not fit into any category at all. I reached for my phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. There are stretches of the park's highway where the world simply doesn't reach, where you are as remote as a person can be while still technically being on a paved road in a developed nation, and I had driven into one of those stretches, and the irony of being a nurse, someone whose entire professional identity is built around helping people who are hurt, sitting in a warm truck staring at a man who was going to die of hypothermia if I didn't do something, that irony was not lost on me. But I didn't get out. I need to be clear about that. I didn't get out. Because he hadn't moved. In the entire time since I had stopped the truck, he had not shifted his weight, and not blinked as far as I could tell, and not reacted to the headlights or the sound of the engine in any way that a person reacts to things. He was as still as the trees. Stiller than the trees, actually, because the spruce boughs were moving slightly in a wind I couldn't hear through the glass, and he was not moving at all, and there was something about that specific stillness, the stillness of a thing that does not need to breathe, that made my hands lock around the steering wheel. I thought about Sarah. That's my daughter. She's 9, lives with her father in Columbus now per the custody arrangement I agreed to because I chose to come here, chose this road, chose this cold, chose this particular quality of alone. I think about that choice a lot on long drives. I think about the version of me that stayed, that fought harder in court, that didn't run 3,000 miles from her own wreckage. I wonder sometimes if the isolation up here, the dark, the distance, the silence that sits on top of the snow like a physical object, if it's a punishment I chose for myself or a cure I didn't know I needed. There are nights driving this highway when both answers feel equally true and equally terrible, and I think, what are you doing here, Mara? What in God's name are you doing in a place like this? I laid on the horn. One long, hard blast that seemed absurd against all that silence. He didn't flinch. I shifted into reverse. The truck moved backward maybe 15 feet before I stopped, because backing down a 2-lane highway in the dark at 40 below is its own kind of dying, and I sat there with my foot on the brake and my reverse lights painting the road red behind me and my headlights still on the man, and he was still standing there, still staring. And now, this is the part when I have difficulty with when I try to tell this story in the daylight. When the telling of it sounds insane, now his head had tilted. Just slightly. Maybe 15 degrees to the right. The way a dog tilts its head. The way something tilts its head when it is trying to understand what it is looking at. I drove around him. I want to be honest about that. I pulled into the opposite lane, gave him as much room as the road allowed, and I drove past him at about 5 miles per hour with every muscle in my body doing something I don't have a word for, not quite shaking, not quite frozen, something in between, something that felt like my body was trying to become very small inside itself. As I passed, my driver's side window was maybe 8 feet from him. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I did not look directly at him as I passed. I have thought about that decision many times since. I think it was the right one. I think if I had looked directly at him from that distance, I would not have been able to keep driving. What I did see, in my peripheral vision, was that he turned to watch me pass. I drove. I drove at first slowly and then very fast, and the spruce trees blurred on either side and the road was empty and black and the heater was screaming and I was not crying but I was making a sound I'd never made before, low and continuous, a sound my body was producing entirely without my permission. I drove 40 miles before I felt my grip on the steering wheel loosen slightly. 40 miles before I could feel my feet again. I passed the lights of a gas station outside of Nanana, and the sight of those lights, the mundane, electric, American normalcy of a gas station lit up at 3 a.m., made me sob with a force that surprised me. I pulled into the lot and sat there for 15 minutes under the fluorescence with the engine running and 2 tears on my face that had dried almost instantly in the heat of the cab, tight and stiff, like something had tried to crawl across my face and been stopped. I drove the rest of the way to Fairbanks without incident. My apartment was dark and cold the way apartments are when you've been gone for 14 hours, that particular stale cold that settles into spaces that aren't being lived in, and I turned on every light, every single one, including the closet lights and the bathroom light and the little light above the stove that I never use. I didn't sleep. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the wall. In the morning, I called the Fairbanks Police Department non-emergency line. I described what I had seen. The woman on the phone was polite in the practiced way of someone managing a caller she has already categorized. She took my information and told me they'd look into it. I asked if there had been any reports of a car accident on that stretch of the Parks Highway in the previous 12 hours, any missing persons reported in the area, anyone found wandering near the road. She paused, a pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long, and said she couldn't share details of ongoing investigations but that she had noted my report. I asked if this had happened before. She said she couldn't comment on that. I drove out to that stretch of road 2 days later, on my day off, in full daylight, because I am a person who needs to understand things. I needed to understand this one. I found this spot. I know that road. I told you, I know every inch of it, and I pulled onto the shoulder and I got out of my truck and I stood in the cold and I looked at the road. I want to be very precise about what I found, because the precision matters, because the precision is the thing that has not let me sleep properly since January. There were tire tracks in the snow on the shoulder. Mine, from when I had braked. The marks were still visible in the packed snow, the slight fishtail, exactly as I remembered. The temperature had stayed consistently low enough that nothing had melted, nothing had shifted. The snow on the road surface was readable like a document. There were no footprints. Not in the road where he had been standing. Not on either shoulder. Not leading to the tree line or away from it. The snow on that section of road was smooth and undisturbed, and it had been undisturbed for at least 2 days because nothing had fallen and nothing had blown and the cold had held everything perfectly still, and a man had been standing in the middle of that road and he had left no record of it whatsoever. Not a boot print. Not a compression. Nothing. I stood there for a long time. Long enough that the cold started to find the gaps in my jacket. I looked at the tree line on both sides of the road, the dark spruce standing silent and dense, the kind of forest that goes back miles before it hits anything, a river, a ridge, another road. I thought about what it would mean to walk into those trees. I thought about all the people who have walked into those trees in Alaska and never walked back out, and how the forest doesn't care, how the cold doesn't care, how the dark doesn't care, because none of those things were ever designed to care about you. I thought about Sarah. I thought about Columbus. I thought about the version of me that stayed. I got back in my truck. I have not driven that road at night since. I do day shifts now. I took a pay cut to do it, gave up the differential, and my supervisor looked at me in a way that said she had seen this before, nurses burning out, nurses finding new reasons to alter their routines, nurses who come back from something changed in a way they can't quite explain at a performance review. I let her think it was burnout. It's easier. But here is the thing. Here is the thing I have not told anyone, not the police, not Dana, not my mother who calls every Sunday from Ohio and asks if I've thought about coming home. 6 weeks after it happened, I was going through the photos on my phone. I was looking for a picture of my apartment to send to a friend who was asking what it looked like, and I scrolled too far back, into January, and I found something that should not have been there. My phone had taken a photo. Not a video, a photo. The timestamp said 3:14 a.m., January 18th, which was the night, which was the exact minute I had checked for Dana's text, which was when my phone was face down in the cup holder, which means I did not take this photo. The photo is dark. It is mostly the darkness of the inside of a cup holder and the ambient glow of dashboard lights. But in the upper left corner, through the windshield, lit by headlights, you can see the road. You can see the figure standing on the road. And the reason I don't sleep well anymore, the reason I turn on every light in my apartment on nights when the temperature drops below -30 and the wind is low and the dark outside has that specific weight to it, the reason I am thinking seriously, for the first time in 6 years, about going home to Ohio, is not the figure itself. It's what I noticed the 4th or 5th time I looked at the photo, after I had talked myself out of deleting it, after I had told myself I should keep it, that it was evidence of something, that maybe someday it would mean something, after I had zoomed in on that grainy, dark, deeply wrong image as far as my phone's resolution would allow. The figure is standing in the road, exactly where I remember. The headlights are on him. You can see the flannel shirt, the dark hair, the stillness of him. But in the photo, he's not facing toward the truck. He's facing away. He's facing away from me, looking back down the road in the direction I had come from, and his left arm is raised, and he appears to be pointing at something behind my truck, something in the dark behind me that my headlights weren't reaching, something I never thought to look for because I was so focused on the figure in front of me that it never once occurred to me to check the mirror and see what might have been standing behind me in the dark the whole time. I checked the mirror. That is the thought I cannot stop having. What if I had checked the mirror? What if I had looked, at 3:14 in the morning on an empty black road 40 miles from the nearest lit building, at what was standing behind my truck in the 40 below dark? I don't know which possibility frightens me more. That I would have seen something. Or that the mirror would have shown me nothing at all, just the empty road, the spruce trees, the dark, and that the figure in front of me was not a warning about what was behind me, but a distraction from it. That whatever was behind my truck in that dark didn't need me to see it. That it already had what it came for. That it had been watching me the entire drive, patient and cold and absolutely still, and I never knew. I still live in Fairbanks. I haven't left yet. But I check the mirror now. Every night, on every road, in every kind of dark. I check the mirror before I get out of the truck. I check the mirror before I convince myself that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it isn't there. I check the mirror and sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, in the specific dark of January on the specific roads I can't stop driving because they are the only roads there are, I am not sure I want to know what's looking back.